Thank you, Michael. It is so good to catch up with you and to have you on the Enneagram and Marriage podcast. Thanks for returning.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad to be back. I was happy when you reached out.
So cool that we get to talk today about not just the ways that we shine together, which we always get to talk about with our clients as marriage helpers, but what I love that you have brought to us on Instagram and also just within your own dynamics is you have created a wonderful avenue for us to learn more about the soul child. And I think that when you work with couples, as you know, you probably feel this way too, that we need all the cards we can to help. So today our audience gets blessed by you. Can you share a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. So my name is Michael Shahan. I am a marriage and family therapist. I live in Kansas City, Kansas City area. I live on the Kansas side, practice on the Missouri side. But yeah, I've been practicing as a practicing marriage and family therapist for 5 years now, maybe something like that, maybe a little bit more. And I also use the Enneagram. So I use the Enneagram in my practice more than anything. I teach about the Enneagram. I do presentations to companies, big and small. I've actually developed a course for the therapists or mental health professionals or helpers of any kind who want to learn how to use the Enneagram in their practice. It's like a 6-week course. Yeah, I love that. I do that maybe 2 or 3 times every year. It's one of my favorite things that I do. Can I talk about the retreat really quick?
I love that. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So for the first time ever, I'm putting on a retreat in Costa Rica this October 5th. I'm really, really excited about it. It is an Enneagram and meditation retreat. Yeah, it's learning about meditation and practicing meditation and learning about how to tune into the 3 centers of intelligence, right? The head, heart, and the body, and how important it is to tune into those and how different numbers tend to be unbalanced in one direction. And so learning how to tune into each center and have access to that when you need it, because we need all 3. And so, yeah, I'm wanting people to walk away with an ability and having experienced really sinking into their own head, their heart, and their body in a way that they never have, and knowing how to utilize those as a resource moving forward. I really think it will be extremely impactful for people who come, especially people who are really sort of like my main target audience. My people, I feel like, are the people who are doing a lot of self-work and wanting to do that and have a lot of awareness around things, but sometimes don't know how to do things differently. Even with that awareness, it can cause this frustration and wanting to give up. And yeah, I feel like those are my people because I feel that all the time.
Yes.
And so I really want this whole meditation thing to know how to accept self-awareness and self-compassion is what I want people to develop more than anything to this retreat. And so I think that's what it takes to finally change our patterns. And so yeah, that's kind of why I did this retreat. So it's coming up in October. As of now, it's a little close. There's like through the company I do this with, there's you have to pay in full if you do it now, but you can work with other companies like Affirm to do payment plans if you need. So yeah, just reach out to me, email me, shoot me a message over Instagram if anybody has any questions about it or would like to get some more information on it.
That sounds so awesome. And I really love the idea of doing your work in a separate format where you get to learn and really feel it, because I think all of us on Instagram are out there going, oh, I like this. I like this. And we become better at intentional scrolling. I try to scroll on Fridays when I'm going to be scouring, but it's like, I think that what we're all looking at is even on those Fridays or whatever days you guys scroll, there's not this full intentionality. Like, okay, now I'm going to take that practice. We're still a bit scattered. And so I love the idea of like pulling away and doing the
from
work
everything and practicing it, learning how to do it, having your questions answered, having hours of experience just to really sit. Because I did so many, when I teach meditation a lot to clients and the same questions pop up almost every single time. And so I'm excited to be in a space where people address those and we get to talk through those. And it's in Costa Rica in a rainforest. And then it's like in these hot springs, and there'll be a hike to a volcano one day. And it's just going to be the day that we're focusing on the body center. There's like a whole massage spa day for a few hours, which I think is gonna be perfect. Like, let's tune into our bodies when it's really easy and feels great. And that'll help us practice.
Gosh, that is so cool. You guys are going to have so much fun.
I'm really excited about it.
100% FOMO. It's okay. I'm owning the FOMO right now. So really thankful and excited that you could share that. And it's in the show notes. So you guys make sure to check it out. Michael also has a course on the polyvagal system. I took the 2-part course that you and Kaylin did. And it's a really good course. So if you guys are also wanting to learn more about your fight or flight responses, can you tell us a little bit about that before we pop into our big topic today?
Yeah, I don't know when you'll release this episode, but I have a recorded talk at the Enneagram, International Enneagram Association this Friday. I don't remember when it starts, but on this topic, it's like an hour-long brief. But basically, polyvagal theory is a map of our nervous system, where we go in fight or flight, and what causes us to go there, and how we get out of fight or flight. And several years ago, a colleague and I sort of mapped out a map for each Enneagram number, their nervous system, when they're in fight or flight, when they're in safe, and when they're in shutdown. And it's really cool. I think it's a really, really helpful, practical tool for people to combine really wanting to Yeah. Do that work. And yes, also available on my website. It's several hours long is the course that I sell, but also this third, that'll be that 1 hour kind of primer, will be out there at the Enneagram conference.
Congratulations. That's awesome. I love
Thanks.
that you're in
Thank you.
multiple spaces and people can meet with you here and these other places because you have a lot to teach. And that's why we're putting that in the show notes too, but also nice for us to pop into our conversation now about when spouses are in that place where they're kind of tapping out on, okay, I know my type, I know what's happening with me, but there's this whole part of me that was perhaps lost as a child, in essence, that I don't have anymore that I can maybe pick up on. Some people aren't aware of that. Some are. Today, you're going to teach us about that. And I'm so glad. So can you tell us a little bit about the soul child theory?
The idea of the soul child itself is this idea that says that our Enneagram number, so our growth number, right, is I mean, of course, I teach it differently. It's right. It's not just growth this direction, stress, but what is typically called the growth number, that is our soul child number, meaning we were born with way more capacity to live in that space and more access to that space. But for some reason, it was sort of not allowed. We had to repress that part of ourselves and shift more toward our number that we are now. So we kind of lose as we get older that soul child in us. It's hidden. It's a very immature part of us because we never developed it because we had to hide it for whatever reason. And this when I heard this theory a few years ago, it instantly resonated with me because when I do work with clients and when I've done work with myself, I hear this idea from multiple people over and over again that their growth actually feels like I'm growing and I feel like a different person, but it also feels weirdly familiar at the same time. There's a T.S. Eliot quote about exploration that really, and when I heard this, it really resonated with me. So I liked this quote even before I heard the soul child, but it fits everything. It says, he said, "We shall not cease from exploration, and at the end of our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." This idea, which is just like that, right? I heard this from clients over and over again, not in this language, of course, right? Because my clients aren't famous poets, but this language is beautiful and it's perfect. And I hear that from so many people, and I felt that. And so when I heard the soul child theory, it says basically like growth looks more like subtraction, not addition. You're taking your defenses away and finding parts of yourself that were already there. You're not adding new parts to you. So, and it's just, I love that. There's so much beauty in that. There's so much, it's as a therapist or like when I'm doing work with you and I'm not giving you something that you don't already have. I don't like own this like healing thing, this part of you that you need to gain. It's already there. It's just covered up from years and years of. So when we do our growth, we're accessing that again, but it feels new at the same time. It's very paradoxical, but I stand firm in the truth of that. That's how growth feels like. And so the soul child theory for me has always really clicked.
Yeah. And I think that for most people, when they're listening, and we'll talk about your type if you're wondering what that looks like for you, but I think they're probably also feeling that way. Like if they know this theory and they're thinking this through with you, they're like, oh my gosh, okay, so that number that I spend a lot of time in when I'm healthy, that's another part of my personality. And no wonder. And I think that that's so cool because I do believe that personality is more of a spectrum. And so I like how the Enneagram allows us to have a map and allows us to see it. There's a bit of fluidity and overlap. And so today, I know you're going to take us through all the types, which is so cool. Tell us about briefly why you feel like this resonated for you as a person. I know you identify as an Enneagram 9. What made you feel like, yes, this worked for me?
So, so I'll talk more in depth on the 9 itself when we get to the 9, but the 9, the soul child is a 3, right? That growth space. So there's inside of like the theory says that inside of 9s, there is a huge desire to be seen, to be front and center, to important, to do those things, but it was kind of shut out. We weren't allowed to, or that. And I realized, and I think different, no matter sort of what cultural context or context you grow up in, you'll have the wound will be different, but it'll still be this sort of like, I had to shove this part of me away for different reasons, given the people, but I had to shove this part away. For me, I think when I look back at it, my 2 brothers and my dad, and then I have my mom too. It's just all of us. They're all assertive types, 3, 7, and 8. And so I think when I came out with any of my 3ness and front and centerness, assertiveness growing up, that was difficult for them, their own sort of personality patterns, right? Because they right, like they're a little more pushing forward and making things happen and getting their way and able to do that. And so I think when I would get my way or have a need or a want, like it would be, or if I wanted to show off or I don't know if that makes sense, it would be, I think it was uncomfortable for them. And so that's part of what, like, I was like, oh, this is unsafe to do this. I guess I'll shut down. I guess I'm nobody important. And then the message just like gets further and further into me as a 9, as an adult. And just to also what's helped with this is almost normalizing that, taking away. I think a lot of 9s can have a lot of shame or judgment around the 3 space, like that's arrogant, that's narcissistic, that's bad. That's I'd be obsessed with myself if I'm like a 3. Like 9s have a lot of strong language for 3s a lot of ways, and it's helped normalize that. Like it's okay. Like, and I think as a kid, I loved wearing nice clothes, and I used to get really nervous about what other people would think of me, and I wanted to make a good impression and all this stuff. And like you wouldn't. And that's that 3ness is there in me when I look back and knowing like, you know what, that's there. That's not a bad thing. That's part of me. That's a part of me that's just kind of didn't get much say and it's kind of immature. And so I get to work on that and I get to know that that's part of me and not just accept that, but maybe even celebrate it. Has been a lot of my own work lately, honestly.
I love that. And I love that it takes you out of just the box of your type, but it also fits with you doing your 9 work too, because you are important and you do have a voice and you're allowed to be seen because you have beautiful gifts too. And so that's so cool that you're just, and there's a lot of 9 listeners and there's a lot of 9s out there. So I'm really glad we can spend extra time on this one. Good. And I know we'll explain it further, but like, that's a great start because it's about you and why you would share this. You're not just trained in Enneagram, but in all clinical aspects or so many modalities. And so for you to pick this one so and to buy in, I'm like paying attention and I have noticed. Life, so I like it. I go to the 5 space and I like to spend a lot of time there. And I'm glad for us to be able to let people know that they're not alone. Plus this is a relationship pod. So keep an eye on thinking this through with us about what is your spouse, kind of, how do they buy in to when you go to that space? Cause that's another place people can work, right?
Because and it's that space. One other thing I wanted to say, like people can romanticize our growth number, like, oh, I want to be more my growth number, like, and that's cool, yes, and it's a very vulnerable space because it's the space we've checked out from and got wounded in growing up, and so going to that growth space opens us up to all these wounds that our number has kept us from the chance of even feeling. Does that make sense? And so I think when we go to that growth space with the most important and the most sort of intimate and close relationship of our life, our spouse or our partner, like it's going to be extremely vulnerable, and you will most likely feel very easily wounded by your partner in those spaces because it's a new vulnerable space for you, whether they're meaning to or not. And to just see that and know that and address that, I think can be really helpful in relationships. Yeah,
I do too. And I think you're really like, I think people are like, oh my gosh, because when you guys hear us go through all the types, that's a cool filter you just shared because I know I do that to Wes. I'm like, you don't let me go to my 5. It's like that's not always about him.
And that's not the reality. And sometimes it's when I'm like when I'm 5, it's vulnerable, and that's why I shrink back. Sometimes it is. It's a both and. It's always a both and in relationships.
Yes, and he's working on it, and so am I. He was letting me nerd out in my Jane Austen autobiography yesterday, and he's like, "Come on, let's go." And I'm like, "All right, I'm putting it down." And so like, but there's that immature guilt of being like a kid caught with porn.
That's sort of. That's a very related to that soul child thing. We'll get to that in a minute when we talk about the one soul child episode. Okay.
Yes. Okay. Well, let's go there. I think people are primed. And then I also shared a little bit before you came on to let them know, to dig in a bit to theirs. But now that we're here, cool. I do want to ask you if you can walk us around the Enneagram to each of the types and help them to understand what they might want to look at with their spouse, with themselves, to see this part of themselves that may have gotten left behind.
Yes. So first of all, the soul child theory, like it's not as scientific. It's not like everything I say has to exist for you as this number, which I don't think is true about anything in the Enneagram, honestly. But I just want to at least say that out loud. I think people can say like, I thought it was this number, but he said something that didn't fit my experience, so I must not be. Like, no. It's just it can come out so many different ways. Don't doubt yourself because of something I've said. But I don't know.
That you added that.
So going on, we can start at 1 and just kind of talk about the soul child thing. Is that okay?
Perfect. I love it.
So, and it's connected when I teach in my course, I connect it to the childhood wound. So starting with the 1, that childhood wound is a wound of self-judgment. So starting with the 1, and then the soul child of the Enneagram 1 is the 7, right? That's their growth space. And so inside this theory says that inside every 1 is a desire, little kid, a little soul child, and there's a desire to play and explore and do one exciting thing to another that was never encouraged in my childhood, right? There's a whole sort of common thing that one's like, it exists in different contexts, but this is how I teach my clients. There's like a 1 as a child, it was have to do homework, have to do all the stuff and play, but I never got to play because it was constantly doing more things. There's always another thing to do. There's always another responsible thing to do. I can't do this. I can't play. I can't be irresponsible. And so that Enneagram 7 in them who wants to play and explore and have a good time and be spontaneous is hidden in there and had to hide away from a 1. So that's a very childlike part of them, having expressed suppressed their adventurous side, and assuming things like that are wrong or maybe even immoral or bad or not helpful, or irresponsible. 1s can see a lot of spontaneity as irresponsible, and that's the kind of like a rejection of that soul child self. When ones I've heard clients saying things like, I want so badly to rest and not have a to-do list, but I don't know how. So many people, I don't think people see that a lot with 1s. They think they just, to the core of them, want to always be sitting out and doing these things and keeping, and I think they get exhausted with that. And that's their soul child just kind of screaming out, like, let us relax, let us play, because we never got to growing up.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what that kind of hidden soul child one looks like. A lot of and when it can get vulnerable, I'm going to bring this up for everyone because especially this relationship podcast is I want to get practical here. When an Enneagram one is letting themselves, like I know an Enneagram one who she would when she would be in a really good mood, she'd clean when she's cleaning the house, she'd turn on music and just kind of dance, which I feel is very just like accessing that seven space. But when her kids would say, her kid one time said, "That looks weird when you dance like that." Instant shut off. Like, guess I'm never doing that again. I think that's a great example of that, how he can be wounded. And so the partner of a one, when they're so, I think needs to be careful and loving in how they sort of talk and one will be in a, right. We talked, it's a both and thing, right? It's not just up to the spouse to make sure they're okay. And it's not just up to the Enneagram one to, right, to be vulnerable no matter what the safety looks like. But it's a vulnerable space for one to access that childlike energy, that silliness, that adventure, that spontaneity, maybe even choosing not being responsible. So that's a very, very vulnerable place for them to be. And so treating that well and kindly and lovingly and encouraging it. And like being able to see that in your partner, if your partner's a one, I think. And it can be a beautiful thing to see one access that space, honestly.
Yeah, it really can. And it's so beautiful to think of ones doing that because we think of them as always, like you said, so following and towing the line. So getting to see them in that playful space is a joy to even behold, but also it can come off immature. And so you're helping us all to understand, and to, I think, be a bit more patient with our spouse. Clumsy sometimes when we're first putting these moves on.
Oh yeah, it's going to be clunky. When our partner accesses that space, that's going to be new for us too, and we might get triggered too. This is a new part of them that we're seeing, and so our humanness is going to want to judge it right away, especially as if they're a one or, and so just knowing trying not to judge that, like knowing that it's
that's helpful. And
I don't know what to say about that. I feel like
no, that was great because we really got through one in a good way. And I think ones are trying to pay attention. And also I think they're trying to say, how can I pick that up a little bit? And would you just say, just start being a little bit playful and start allowing it? And when the inner critic comes in, it's your spouse, like, how can we address that?
That's a good question. Maybe like letting yourself be. So I would also start this in small ways. Be spontaneous. I would say for one, be spontaneous in a small way. Don't like book a trip. Don't go full 7 right away. But just in small ways, do something that's more spontaneous, something you haven't thought through, something that you might deem irresponsible or not a good use of your time. Give yourself a few minutes of doing that. But it's also moving toward that growth space isn't like white knuckling and making yourself do new things. Moving toward the growth space is also a byproduct of doing your own growth work as your number. Does that make sense? I think it's a both and. There's some things that you can do intentionally move that way. And as the growth stuff the growth lines work by, I think when we are best self, it just starts coming out of us.
Yeah, I love that. I love that we can take that confidence with us to know this is going to be happening to you anyway. You might already notice as you're listening, like, oh, this is happening. I'm glad. So that's
or I felt this in here. I felt this at certain, even not even doing something different and spontaneous, but even looking back when you have been spontaneous and see how that's gone. Because there's probably some wounding around it. A lot of maybe for one, never again. Something went bad. So that's the last time I'm spontaneous. This is why I don't do this. Your sort of personality wanting to come crashing back to how it always was when we changed too much.
100%. I wish I could say more about it, but I can't because we need to move on to 2. All right. So tell us about the 2s.
The Enneagram 2 soul child is the 4. And the childhood wound has to do with self-sacrifice for 2, sort of always having too much asked from you and made responsible for. Soul child of 4 is this sort of almost this, not self-centered, but self-focused. So when I teach 4, it's self-referencing, but it's not, I don't say that as a moral judgment. Our culture tends to moralize other people who reference other people as better or somehow more like helpful or humble, and people who are self-referencing as not. And I don't think that needs to be a moral issue. So 2s get to be more, there's this self-referencing part of them that wants to, and it comes out in kind of like not healthy ways in a lot of unhealthy 2s. What 2s can get from that 4 space, what they've hidden away is this creative part of them, this kind of allowing them to access all of their emotions. And so 2s, I love this phrase. I forgot who said this. Somebody was teaching this a while back, that 2s tend to live on the front of their hearts and 4s tend to live in the back of their hearts. Meaning 2s, their emotions are out there for other people, the kind of surface level, quote, easier emotions, where the 4s live in this deep in the recesses of their heart, the sadness, the harder emotions that are for them, not for other people. And so 2s have had to shove away that 4ness, that deeply feeling, I'm allowed to feel this, create creativity for the sake of themselves, not just for others. That's what a 4 has, a 2 has sort of hidden away. There's almost like, I can't be that way growing up because then I won't be loved. And then people will reject me. And so I can't be this kind of 4, knowing what I want, having these emotions, being a big presence. I can't be that as a 2 because then I don't get my need met of
Hmm.
of being loved and cared for in relationship.
Oh, that's huge because we need attachment and love
I
and
do, so
reminding
too.
us like I can't go to my withdrawing space if that's not met. And so
Yep.
no
Yep.
wonder they're
The
feeling like
two, yeah. That
hmm,
main defense mechanism of two is repression. So it's I'm going to repress the parts of me that I deem that I think other people will deem not lovable or not good. Or if I'm going to be a burden on people, I'll repress these parts of me, and that's so much of that four space. There's so much of their
hmm.
hidden in there.
Wow. And I can imagine with spouses, because I do this work a lot with the 2 and the 5 pairing, but all the types with the 2. Sometimes that 2 feels like I can't go to that 4 space with the spouse because I'm going to lose my spouse's love. So I
Yeah.
think
Oh
that's
man, that's
really
it. Yes.
fascinating.
That's scary. I remember a few years ago realizing just how like I have a client who's a two who said like if my partner says they love me, I believe it at first, and then a while into the relationship, it gets so hard to believe. It always feels like it's at risk, which would be
Mhm.
so scary.
Mhm. Yeah, that rejection.
So scary. That fear of rejection, and I'm not loved unless I do this and this, and I can't like as I am right now, good and bad, can't be loved. I have to manage who I am and who I present to be loved, and so I can't access that four space.
But when they do, when they take this small step to 4, what do you think they really add that helps them to feel a bit
Mm,
more stable?
um, that's a great question. Add a lot of I get to feel this, even like I don't know, like an anger maybe in there, like an intensity. Like I get to feel this, and you don't get to tell me not to. And I
Yeah.
get to like twos can like be secretly jealous. I think a lot that everyone else gets to put up their feet and wish I could, but I'm doing all these things and like, but they're also not letting themselves at the same time. So it gets confusing. But it's this they access this freedom, I think, to take care of themselves, to set boundaries. And so so if you're a partner of a two and they're doing this and taking care of themselves and setting boundaries and sort of freely expressing what they can and not repressing these things, that's such a
Mm.
there's a fear that am I being mean? Are people going to stop loving me? I did this meme series a while back of Google search history for each Enneagram number.
Yeah.
And for the two, my favorite one was how do I set boundaries without feeling mean? Because I've probably heard that from 80% of my Enneagram 2 clients. It's just such a difficult space.
Yeah.
They're like, I can do that. Fours can be at their worst kind of elitist and I'm better than you. They can come off that way. And so for the twos to access some of that space for themselves and say like,
Yeah.
I'm great. Like I get to do this and I'm not risking my love, my relationships and my connection by accessing myself in the deepest recesses of my heart and being creative and doing what I want, those kinds of things.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And it reminds me of Mary and Martha. And really, a Martha
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Yes.
to go to that Mary space and say, oh
I
my
love that.
gosh, I'm allowed to rest. And actually, funny enough, my 4 played that part this year in a dance that
Perfect.
she was doing. And she was like, that's who a 4 is anyway. And I think half the day
Mm,
yesterday, she sat and did art. And I think that that's something that 4 space can give to that too. And you're really reminding me of a visual that I can take for our twos. And I hope our twos are listening like, okay, you just said they have permission to take care of themselves and in a way they
yeah.
maybe never have, and
Mm-hmm.
how beautiful and balanced they're going to come out versus they can come off as manipulative and pushy and pushing for love, but now they're getting some love of self. And I love how you explained that to
Yeah.
us, 'cause people talk
Mm.
about twos going to their 8 space a lot and they rarely talk about this important 4 space, so thank you.
Yeah, that's true. I also love when twos go to that eight space. It's awesome.
It really can be because it's like, wow, you just set your
As
boundary.
long as it's not directed at me, we're fine. If I'm adjacent to it when it's happening, it's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, that's true. Popcorn. Otherwise, watch out. And we're both couples helpers, so I know we know all the
Yep.
different
Oh
realms of
yeah. Oh
it.
yeah.
So
Hmm.
lots of compassion. But let's move
Oh
on
yeah.
to threes and see
Hmm.
what we feel about the threes when they're in that soul child space.
Yeah. So the childhood wound of a three is the rejection of core self. Right? This sort of like part of me, they sort of lose sight of who they are because I need to be what other people need me to be.
Mm.
And so the soul child space for the three is the six.
Mm.
So what the three can gain from that six. So I guess I can explain. There's a part of a three that wants to that Enneagram 6 soul child space inside every three is this space that says like I don't want to keep working. I want to rest. I don't want to hold it all together anymore. Like there's like I'm driving the bus, I'm driving everybody.
Yeah.
There's in threes, there's this sense, this belief that if I'm not the one pushing things forward, it won't happen. Things won't move forward.
Yeah.
And so there's this part of them, the six, and then that says like we can just ride the bus and somebody else can drive because that would be great. But to let myself relax into that,
Yeah.
sort of learning that I can. There's this part of them like a very healthy like there's the six in them that at their best. That's
Mm.
six, right? Learning how to I can cope and I'm courageous and I'm powerful and I can affect the world. And
Mhm.
so, but the three can have that, but it's almost from the sense of projecting. Like I need to be powerful and confident to feel okay. First, with that soul child is I am okay and I can be taken care of and I can just be loyal to somebody and like I want to be taken care of and I want to trust somebody. They learn how to yeah, cope with things that feel, using that sixth space, cope with things that feel unstable and calm their inner selves and know that they are capable and they have a support system to lean on when they need. It's also that's also a big access
Mm,
to the soul child of the 3 is 6 is
mm.
asking for help, leaning on my support system, not having to do it by myself
Yeah,
is
that's
a big piece of that
true.
3. Yes, yes.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, you're really allowing them to see you have true deep courage, not just a shell or a mask of courage. You have this sense of
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
community and you can be loyal and you can stay. I think that's one of the most beautiful pieces that they can take. And I love how when we, don't box people into their type, but we actually allow this reminder. Maybe, like you said, as a child, they did not feel permission to be anything else but an achiever. I
Mm-hmm.
know my 3 sister
Right.
came on this podcast and said, this is the way I was raised. I had to be the best at everything or there wasn't going to be love. Now that they're an adult, there's a different
Mm.
option if they're in a
Yeah.
stable environment.
Yes, yes. And that 3, there's like that soul child 6 of a that 6 soul child of a 3 that they had to shove away was a lot of anxiety and insecurity and fear growing up. But I don't think 3s didn't feel like they were allowed to. A lot of times there's a lot of instability, perceived instability from a 3. And so no one's gonna step up and ease this and take care of it. So I need to.
Yeah.
But so they almost like, I'm gonna hide away that scared, insecure part of me and just like make it happen myself, sort of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
And,
such a good way for 3s to process that with
mm,
you. Is this is probably what
mm,
happened, and now that you're coming out of it, you and your spouse are going to have to titrate. How do you get more stability? How do you get more loyalty?
yeah.
And even how do you get taken care of a little bit in that 6 space because you're always taking
Yes.
care of everybody.
Exactly. How can I like relax and believe that things will still keep moving forward? And so when a 3, when if your partner's a 3 and they start asking for help or not working as hard, or the 3s when they stop being so active and working so they can feel lazy or irresponsible or depressed, or they can get in touch with their sadness. And that's a very vulnerable space for a 3 to be, to sort of not at the helm of everything.
Mhm. Yeah, it's really hard. And so taking it in these small bites that you said, just do a little bit at a
Yeah.
time, one little step, adjust together as couples, come back for another step. Like I like that. That's a really good reminder for all of us. Okay, what about the type 4 when they're in the soul child space?
Yeah, so their soul child is a 1, and that childhood wound is a rejection of identity in the 4.
Mhm.
And so that the Enneagram, the 1 in them is this little. So inside every 4 is this little like rule following Enneagram 1 as a kid, right? Sort of like I want to make sure everyone. It's very like oldest child kind of thing. That everyone like this stereotype type for the oldest child. Everyone needs to follow the straight and narrow, and they'll be punished if they don't. And there's a right way to do this. Um, yeah. So then, but the sort of rejection of that part of them, of the being wanting to be perfect, like it turns into the 4 self of I'm not perfect, something's wrong with me,
Yeah.
and I need to like find people just don't understand, right? Like there's almost this desire to be perfect and do it right as a kid that 4s have in that one space that they have disconnected from. Like I guess I'm not, and so I'm not perfect, and something's wrong with me, and I'm broken, and so I can't be that. Um, yeah, and so when a 4 is healthy, what they can get in touch with when they're working toward health and growing, right, and learning to access and comfort and be with that Enneagram 1 space in them, they are able to really like address that feeling of being damaged or rejected, and sort of appreciate their own uniqueness for its positive reasons, not its negative reasons, if that makes sense. I think that can really like I am good and I'm doing things right, and this is like how I am is okay, and I'm not just a broken outcast. But like, because there's a lot of 1s that their worst can say like, get over it, just do what needs to be done, it doesn't matter what you're feeling. And so like that's almost too far that direction, right? But when 4s have access to that 1, and then they're able to move forward and out of feeling stuck and out of the kind of martyrdom space that they can get into at times. Yeah, does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. And I'm even reminded that we're wanting you to walk to these spaces with health, because I think what we don't want is for
Yes.
the 4 to walk to this space in further self
Oh yeah,
condemnation.
if you go to your growth space without like support and security and safety, I think like it can almost re-wound you in a lot of ways, because you're going right back to where those wounds were held growing up.
And your spouse and your family. I know that when our 4
Mm,
goes to her 1 in unhealth, I have to start tending to some of the wounds that I perhaps wounded her with from my own 1 space when I was unhealthy when she was a toddler. And then
wow.
I'm
Okay.
watching her projected onto her 9 sister and the whole family and say, like, you all should be perfect. And I'm like, uh-oh, like that's not you going to your soul child. I don't use that word, but it's like
Sure.
I'm like, okay, there's her unhealthy 1 coming out. And then I usually stop there to say, like, you are so loved. But you don't have to be
Mm,
perfect, and nobody here has to be perfect in order to be loved. So can we do some breath work? Can I help
mm.
to remind you that because I can see the self-hate when that starts to take over. I can see
Wow.
that it's
Really?
coming from a
Okay.
deep
Sure.
place. So I just wanted to
Mm,
kind of point that out to our listeners. Like, I think it's a good time to interject to say, like, make sure you try to take the route of health to these places, because you could really, notice that it's, yeah, I'm in my 5 or 3 or 1 or whatever, but like you just took the worst way there. And that's going to just make
yeah.
everything worse.
Yep. Exactly. That's a great way to put that. We we do it poorly. We kind of drown in that space and hurt ourselves and other people when we haven't practiced it and sort of like strengthen those parts of us. Yeah. Yep.
And I'm guilty of the same when I mentioned that about my 5 space. Okay, now tell us about the
Mhm.
type 5s themselves and where did they go?
Yeah. So the childhood wound of a 5 is a rejection of intimacy and a closeness. And so then the soul child for a 5 is an 8. So inside every Enneagram 5 is actually very raging, angry, justice oriented, wanting to stand up for themselves, and other 8. And I know this is a fiction story. My favorite book of all time is the King Killer Chronicles. The first story is called The Name of the Wind. It's like a fantasy book, and I'm convinced the main character is a sexual 5.
Wow.
He's just fits so many marks, very flourish in a lot of ways, but he has so much anger inside of him, and a lot of very 8 sounding wounds, and it's just really interesting. I think he writes great characters, and so that it fits. So but yeah, so 8s growing up, we're taught that like somewhere along that wanting to boldly like to strong reactions and emotions are bad. Or the 8s start to learn that zaps my energy, which they always have to keep an eye on. So like I can't access that 8 space. I have to shove that anger and that energy and that boldness down, like from the 5 space. So that's kind of how that goes away. They sort of pull in, check out from that thing that seems like it could cost them too much energy and go into their heads and the quietness of their own mind. And there's like a fear around showing and bringing up that 8ness for fear of draining themselves.
Wow, that's so interesting. And in your book that you read, does that character deal with that even? Do they go far enough into that arc to where you get to see them kind of put on their like 8 bigness and then come back?
Not in a lot of ways. Yeah. I mean, they are like this person. It's the story of somebody telling, it's like this fantasy novel. He's telling a story of, he's like a famous person in the world and has done all these adventures, and he's telling like a story. So he's very 8ish in a lot of ways. And there's not the 3rd book. He's been working on the 3rd book for years and years. So hopefully there's more of that. And it's just people who love that book and in that community are just used to like being like so upset that who knows if this book's ever going to be written, but still love it.
What's the name again?
The Name of the Wind is the first one. It's fantastic. I've read it over and over and over again. It's my favorite fantasy book of all time.
Okay, people are getting a book recommended today.
Cool. It. Yeah.
Well, but I hear you that they're fearing this bigness will cost them too much, and also perhaps in childhood, and it is a perhaps, but somewhere along the route in marriage and childhood, probably a little both, there was a sense of like, this is not the right thing to do. And so you're saying this is actually healthy for you to assert, to put yourself out there, for you not to just only stay away from, you said the intimacy, right? Is what the 5 do.
Closeness, intimacy. Yeah. There's a lot of wounds around that. And a lot of 5s I've worked with and known personally, like when they feel very seen or connected to or vulnerable or intimate, they can feel nauseous. I've or be very freaked out by that, and want to kind of withdraw back into their own sort of headspace. Yeah. But when an 8 what a 5 can access when they're beginning to sort of like work on that 8 space is a lot of this embracing this desire to be more outwardly strong and bold. Sort of develop ways to recognize their emotions, express them comfortably in front of people, even instead of hiding all of it away, because there's a fear of emotions that 5s have, and they're just able to really just be more vibrant and experience, participate in life more directly, rather than it kind of just what I think withdrawn types can have a lot of is like everything's kind of moving past me and happening without me. I have the really, really good, the lady who we talked about earlier, Caitlin Sunderman, who taught the polyvagal theory course. She's a 5. And in so many ways she can come off as very 8ish because she's done so much of her own work, just involved with a lot of things all the time, and like doing really big and new things, and doing retreats. And yeah, it's fantastic. It's awesome to see her. Like she absolutely shrinks back in the 5 space when life gets too much, which I think we all do, no matter how. We never just arrive at our soul child or our growth space. I think you know that, but I just want to say that out loud. We never just like arrive there and we're good. It's always like a thing that we get, and hopefully we get access to easier and easier over time. But we are always still slip back into our own selves in our stress space all the time, no matter what we're doing, because we're human.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that we are going to be on the journey no matter what. Even if you're listening and thinking, I'm going to get it, like, okay, you're going to get it, but then you're going to slide around again and get it again. Oh, that's good encouragement, because we're all being real. And that's one of our favorite things on this podcast is just let's own it. Perfect. We're all in process. We do not talk about perfect marriages here, perfect life. No, but let's talk about 6 and where they go in that soul child space when they're healthy.
Yeah. So the 6, the childhood wound, is this rejection of trust. So their own sort of trusting themselves and not feeling trusted, and feeling not trusted a lot of times by their parental figure, especially the father figure. But the Enneagram, so inside every 6 is this little Enneagram 9 who just wants to relax and stop thinking for just 5 seconds and just like be able to say it is what it is and let it go. Like 9s can be too good at, right? There's a part of them that just wants to remove themselves from the chaos, even if the chaos is their own mind and their own thoughts, and finally find some peace, because it's just chaos in the head of a 6 so often. Just that anxiety and the thinking space, and the kind of not knowing you're even thinking, and being trapped because I'm thinking and I'm trapped by my own brain that does the thinking, and I can't trust that, and like around we go. And but as like the 6 is growing up, got a message that relaxing and not worrying and finding peace was possibly lazy or unacceptable. Take a breather, then your whole life will spin out of control and there'll be no one to blame but yourself, is the kind of internal and external messages that 6 can do, that sort of that hides away that 9. Like, I can't be that way or things will get worse, spin out of control. So I can't let myself live into that 9 space, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah, when a 6 can access that soul child space and comfort that part of them and trust it and be with it, and they're able to find peace. And almost this, like, because what 6 is, the trap for the 6 is, if I can think of everything that goes wrong, I'll be okay. But that comes from not trusting themselves, because I can't handle it if I haven't thought it through. So thinking it through actually creates more anxiety, because I'm thinking of what could go wrong. And then, but they're able to find peace in knowing that I will never be able to prep for everything. That's like, that will never work with 100% certainty, but I can trust myself to handle whatever comes up. Yeah. And then that's where this rest comes in for a 6. Like, I don't need to spin about what could happen when I believe that I can handle what could happen.
Yeah, that's cool. They can really come into their virtue of courage and really allow themselves to say, I have so many gifts and I'm a good planner, but I don't have to be a perfect planner. I don't have to have it all figured out. And I think in marriage, it's often spouses of 6 saying, as you know, I have to figure it out for you too. And so there's a sense of like control that comes over the spouse. And so it's really helpful for you to say to people, like, letting go and doing this 9 space work really helps your whole family to realize and stabilize.
Yeah, because a lot of people around and close to 6s, adjacent to 6s in life, feel like the 6 doesn't trust them to do anything. When in reality, it's the 6 not trusting themselves or anybody to do anything. It's a projection of that. And so when a 6 is able to lean into that 9 space and rest, then they're no longer sort of inadvertently sending these messages to other people close to them that I don't think you can handle this. Like, almost like we all, the 6 is rejected, is people around a 6 are not feeling like they are trusted when a 6 can't trust themselves, which is the truth for every number, unfortunately, right? We can unconsciously project our childhood wound onto other people if we're not careful.
That's a really good point. You guys listen to that, because that's huge. That sometimes we do that in marriage where we're like, this is about you. And it's just not, it's our stuff. So
probably not sometimes, probably like all the time in marriage, I would think, right? That's such a vulnerable part of us, and our partner is such an easy place for us to project those things that we can't see in ourselves.
So true. And it's so helpful and humbling to hear you guys just process that with us here. Like, this is our work to do, but it's also empowering to say, like, what little shifts could a 6 make to go to that 9 space? And would you recommend that they try to get in touch with restfulness? Just like you said, 5s are going to have to work through their nausea and kind of little by little deal with that. What can 6s do to kind of gently come toward the 9?
So what's going to happen for 6 most likely is when a 6 it starts like slowing down their thoughts and like, you know what, I can just be present. And like, so 9s are so good. Yeah, it is what it is. It'll be fine. Almost too much. But when a 6 is able to start doing that and stop, it will feel, a lot of times it will feel irresponsible for a 6 to not think things through, right? It's like your anxiety is this alluring, like, I have to think this through. Otherwise I'm being irresponsible because I'm letting bad things happen. Yeah. That makes like that is this like wall that is so hard for a 6 to get past it. Because if I want to get out of my thoughts, stop thinking about it, what could come back is, and now you're not thinking about it, now bad things are going to happen. So this is irresponsible. And so just, I think being aware of that and knowing that this belief, this thought that comes up, that springs up of this is irresponsible, might not be true. That very, very likely is your anxiety trying to get you to keep feeling anxious because it thinks you need to be protected. It's not actual wisdom. It's actually arguably more responsible to let that thing down and know, and yeah, because then you get to learn that things can be okay when I don't spin about it. You get to have these experiences of trusting yourself, which builds to being able to trust yourself more.
That is so cool and key. And even to the spouses of 6, the little pieces we can do as spouses, try to help empower your 6 so that they can really be with you and not just like your child and you're the parent, because the 6 feels like they can't.
Sure.
I think 6s, we know contrarians can go either way, where they're like, I have to have all the control, or I'm going to release all the control. But instead to just be like, I think we've got this together and we've planned enough. Let's go have some fun. Can be a neat way for the spouse to like bring, I'll use the word bring instead of but like the 6 also taking the deep breath to respond like, yes, I'm going to lean into that. So thank you for permission for fun.
Yeah, I almost have this image that you're talking, and I'm talking almost image of like the partner of a 6. I said the 6 sitting there and their partner like, hey, let's go do something fun, almost like gently putting their arm around them, knowing that they are going to keep looking back. But what about this? But what about this? And saying like, hey, like, let's come back. Like, yes, that is scary, and let's talk about it later. Just knowing that and allowing that, rather than, because what can shut 6 down quick is, oh, stop worrying about so many things so many times. I'm like, okay, cool. Like, that just doesn't help. It doesn't work. And so being with a 6 and almost like your 6 and like bringing them back to the present and pointing out that they can trust themselves. I think when they're in that vulnerable space of the 9 of trusting that things will be okay, I think it can be really helpful.
Yeah. And maybe a little less self-projection in that way of like, You know how nines are like, I'm not that important, and we want nines to feel important, but sixes to go, it's okay, it's going to work out. You're still important, but you don't have to be
Yeah.
so hyper vigilant. Take a breath. And Michael's polyvagal course helpful for
Yes.
helping you get to that
Yeah.
rest
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
digest
Uh-huh.
state.
Mm.
But yeah, just putting on even some breaths. I mean, we could talk all day about six here, but let's
Oh
move on
yeah.
to seven because I don't want
Yes.
to avoid my own time. Let's do mine too.
I won't let
Can't
you.
avoid it.
So that seven, the childhood wound is the absence of nurturing.
Yeah.
And so a lot of I need to nurture myself and do all these things. And so the soul child of a seven is a five. So inside every seven, there's this little almost reclusive Enneagram five
Yeah.
that they sort of a lot of sevens that grow up like taught or believe that you are not allowed to be a loner. That's boring. You can't be boring. Being boring is a choice, is what I've heard a lot of sevens say. Only boring people get bored or something. Like there's a lot of so sevens felt pushed to try new things, to embrace life with positivity, even if they didn't feel like it at times, because this sort of I can't. There's part of me that wants to just be a recluse and pull in and not go and not be overly positive. Like that part wasn't appreciated. That was the part that was tamped down.
Yeah.
And their happy-go-lucky attitudes were encouraged, right?
Yeah. Especially when I
And
got to
so
school. Oh my gosh. School was like, you're a total nerd. I got in trouble from even teachers for being a nerd. So I had to become popular. It was so stupid, but that's how it went. They were like,
wow,
you're
okay.
reading too fast. You're in the nerd, gifted program, like, ew. And so I do feel that can
Interesting, because
happen sometimes
wow.
in school because my parents sort of supported it. And then the school was where it was rejected. So it was really interesting to hear you say that. I was in
Yeah, and
a
it's I love that you
suburb
it's
of
just
Detroit.
oh,
Yeah. But go ahead.
okay. I love that you said that about the sort of nerd thing, because there's a big part of the seven going to five that like that they can sort of value their own intellect and be proud of their own intellect. Because a lot of times sevens kind of discourage that part of themselves.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of if I focus on my intellect and slow down, then I will miss out on life.
Yeah.
Is like when that seven comes in, right? The seven wants them to keep going, the fear, and so they can't. So I like to describe like a seven is a very wide, shallow well, whereas a five is a very deep, narrow well. Or if seven is a shallow, wide pond, whereas a five is a deep. And so sevens, if accessing that five space and slowing down can feel scary to them, because like, what if I miss out? They get that FOMO, and what if I get boring, and what if I'm not? Things aren't as exciting. And so it's scary to access that part of them, even though there is that part of them that's needed. That part of them is needed to be an integrated, well-rounded person. You can't exist as just a seven without that five space to slow you down at times. Sometimes it just forces it to happen uncomfortably.
Yeah, or like me, you can go there too much and want to stay there if it's immature. And mine's been immature for so many years, but I just still love it. And I think part of that is because as a mom, and I know we have a lot of overlays, there's a lot of guilt with going to the five space because I'm going to have FOMO about something my kid needs.
Wow. So it's not just about you anymore. It's I'm taking away from my kids if I'm slowing down.
Away
Kind
from
of.
my kids,
Wow,
and they
that's
all need
scary.
me. And my nine doesn't feel heard. My six needs to be calmed.
Okay.
My four needs to not be rejecting. And then I've got a type one social hubby who really gets anxious about being still. So sometimes I feel like we're all five of us kind of just, there needs to be a lot of grace for me to just almost like set a time frame is what I try to do. Like I need a little time in my five today. And my family knows Enneagram speak, so they get that.
Okay.
If I say like, I need 30 minutes there, I need an hour. And that's kind of what I was doing last night. They do get that, but there might be a time if you're a seven where, because we like to kind of just can be self-referencing, once you can go there, you can get stuck there. And so then I think it's okay for your family to say, it's time for you to come out of there because you're going to stay there for several hours if I don't come get you. And so we do have to kind of balance.
Yeah, that's yeah, and I think there's so much of that's fear-based, right? Like I'll go in there and I don't want to get out, or I want to get out, I don't want to go. So much is fear-based for the seven without realizing it. And I think that there's a lot of, when sevens can access that five soul child, there's a lot of confidence that the world will still be there once I'm finished being still. Right, like it's okay to go to the space, and it doesn't have to, it's not as I have to be out of the space, or I have to be in this space. It's I get to whenever I want to, whenever I need it, because it's less scary to access that space.
Really powerful for sevens here. Thank you, because that is a different space even than the one I referenced, which was me taking all the juice that the fives like, the information. But when a seven actually closes their eyes for rest, that is something we talk a lot about in this podcast, is micro naps and small doses of rest. So thank you for reminding us how scary that is for sevens, because that closing of the eyes and letting go of the fear is very hard for sevens.
Yeah. Yep. I bet it is.
So thank you. Okay. Tell us about eights and how they look when they go to the soul child.
Yeah. So the eights, childhood wound, rejection of trust. Rejection of childhood. So it's like rejection of my innocence, of my childhood. And so eights, the soul child is two, right? So inside eights, there is a kind of Enneagram mates are going to hate this language, but this soft, lonely, and needy little Enneagram too.
Oh, yay.
It's believed or we're taught or experienced this message that like it's not okay to be that way. I can't be soft. I can't be needy because then people have to rely. I have to rely on other people, and then they can control me and use me. And there's all this. It's the betrayal fear, and their guard goes up. And so, yeah, there's I love describing eights as like a cactus with like a soft, gooey marshmallow tender inside. That two in them is this soft, like warm part of them, but the eight almost when they reject that, they believe I need to be strong to protect that. It's too soft, right? Like I see people who are soft getting wounded, and I can't let that happen. So I can't be soft. I have to be hard. I have to be strong. So they lose touch with that gentle, kind of soft, needy. Even that's not a bad word. Yeah. Needy because you're a human.
Yeah.
But they sort of reject those parts of themselves. Mm-hmm. And so when an eight is able to access that soul child and improve their relationship with it and integrate it, they're able to let down their guard, let other people in, and relax, knowing that people can love and take care of them at times. And I had that eight in my course once she said, if I'm the biggest person in the room, just metaphorically, right, not physically, she said, if I'm not the biggest person in the room, I can't let my guard down. And she was an eight. It's like there needs to be somebody who is stronger than me because I don't trust that. With when you access your soul child, you don't need that. You're able to, because it's not like because for her, it's I need somebody bigger than me so I can finally relax, but still feel secure and safe.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? And so to be able to just access that space, even if other people aren't holding it down, is like very difficult for an eight.
Yeah. So what can they do when they want to access that too, but they don't feel like anyone in the room could support them in a catastrophe?
That's a fantastic question. I wish I knew an easy answer for that.
Different for everybody.
Yeah, it's a hard question for eights.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's a really great question because eights can just be so incredibly like stubborn and rejecting and even denying that space even exists in them. A lot of times that two space. Yeah. I think it can feel embarrassing or humiliating for them to know that other people know. So I think maybe even like sharing somebody who feels very, very safe for you, who can hold it, even sharing the fears of needing to hold everything and needing that soft part of themselves. I don't know exactly. Honestly, I don't have as good an answer for that as the other ones for some reason.
Well, I get that. And eights can even call in or write into us on DMs because it's very cool to hear from them what works. Yeah. I don't mind that at all. You're just being real. But I mean, even accessing a friend with heart space, I know friends with being like a 2, 3, or 4, they had helped me to see how to get some of this. And I'm wondering if like them actually spending time with like a 4 who says like, I'm allowed to withdraw, that might be interesting.
Sure. Yeah. And I also think addressing the childhood wound that eights have of there was a point where I had to be the adult and take care of myself and other people, and I haven't looked back.
Yeah. Okay.
For an 8 to address that, I think is probably the most healing thing they can do. It's not simple, but to address that part of them that had to put armor on and be an adult very early on, that rejection of childhood, I think to address that will most likely be the most important thing for an 8 to do in this arena.
Yeah. And even just to talk about it isn't always easy for an 8. So just to talk about it, get some insight, share it with your spouse, let your spouse in, trust them a little bit, just this much, if you're not watching, just tiny bit, because I think that it has to be little by little. And that was why you were kind of stuck, is because it has to be very, very tiny steps for an 8.
Yes. Yeah. And eights don't want to take tiny steps, which just creates a whole nother trap, right? It's like eights want to go all or nothing. I don't want a little bit of something. I want all of it. And so even doing self-work is difficult in that, like it's that trap, right? Like doing everything, doing all of it just keeps me more stuck in my eightness.
Yep. Wow. So guys, this is like little by little. So do your body work if you need that ability to like digest some of the anger that might accompany this or some of the discomfort. But we're believing with you and in you that you can access the softer part of you. And we both know 8s, thankfully, that have kind of walked this, but we're not inside of you. So tell us if there's more. And then tell us about the 9s, Michael. You know this type so well. This is your type.
Yes, I do. So the childhood wound of a 9 is a rejection of their own voice. And then the soul child is the 3 who can use their voice almost easier than anybody else. So that I'm not good enough, and the self-doubt feelings that come up in a 9 come from this childhood of wanting to be recognized and validated for the things that they're good at, but it not happening. Right? Just almost like a little 3. So in a 9 is a little 3 who wants to be validated and seen and appreciated and celebrated. And so that's a part of them that's too painful. They've had to shut it off over their life with I don't care. It is what it is. It's fine. I'm not that important anyways. Because to even access that 3 and say, wait, I have something to say and I'm going to try is very scary. And this childhood of a 9 that they had to reject that big, confident, take up space voice because there's like this, I can't take up space. I can't state strong opinions. I can't be too aggressive. Like I have to sort of, because like for me, my dad was very, very angry in a lot of big ways. And he was a 7, not very healthy, and could kind of throw a fit if he didn't get what he wanted. And so I learned, I don't like dealing with that. So I just won't ask for what I want. So I don't have to deal with a fit anymore. Kind of is kind of how it happened. And one of the specific ways for me. And so that 3 is like, so it feels for me to take up space and actually state my opinions literally feels dysregulating and scary to my nervous system. Well, everybody will be when you go to this growth space, but because it's like my body's coded in this, like, well, you will be in danger of angry and yelled and disconnection. You can yell and disconnection if you state an opinion. So it's unsafe to, like, my body starts to get hot and flushed when I can like really come up, like speak and say my opinions and be confident. Like my body starts to react. It's wild. I love teaching, but when I teach and people are there to listen to me, my back sweats almost the whole time.
Oh my God.
Because I think there's so much rejection of that in me growing up for so long. My body just was going to take a while to catch up.
Wow.
Honestly.
You're such a like 9. And this is part of your meditation in Costa Rica. Like you take people through the triads and like you explaining this as a body type that your temperature will go up and down. And before we got on, your temperature was shifting. It's so funny. Like you are really like, hey, I'm in this work when I do this. And I love how you're letting people know you got to be all in little by little. But like, you know, you're welcoming us into like, try this on and see, because you're saying for 9s, especially here, you know, you're losing too much if you don't do this. Like you're losing yourself. And that's very for 9s.
Yes.
Be this amazing, powerful person that you're wired to actually be. But I find a lot of jealousy with 9s. I find that that's why they shut down a lot too, is people see all these gifts in a 9. Having watched one grow up, I'm like, oh my God.
Wait, you feel jealous? Say that
you feel jealous of 9s. I've watched this of my 9 daughter growing up with all these 9s have this body type energy, so much love, so much peace, often very multi-talented. And I'm watching that people are uncomfortable with that. And so I'm like, also, I'm taking the ownership that some of it is me having my type 7 temper tantrums. Don't think I didn't catch that.
That you saying, okay, sure.
No, trust me, this podcast set knows this. I like saying I'm super healthy. But like I try really hard on the other hand to kind of like notice, like, here's what I do, but here's what I'm like, whoa, like even the college lost her scores. Like everybody forgets this child. And so I'm just saying, I'm watching it happen, and I am validating that there might be multiple reasons, but what we're getting at is you're saying they somehow lost their voice from parents, from siblings, from this sense of
themselves too. It comes from this sort of their own wounds and stuff for sure. But I don't think it's anybody else's fault. It's an everybody thing. But yes, I totally hear what you're saying. I think this like for me as a 9, when a 9, me or any 9 can access that 3 space, there's this sort of this recognition of our own inner drive, and like I can be unstoppable, and I can do something like my retreat, like the retreat that I'm doing in October. I really believe that I will change people's lives in this retreat, and I'm convinced that I would not have been able to say that had I not sort of like worked on myself for a long time and accessed some of this. I think that's me accessing that 3 space. That's saying I am important, and what I have to say and what I've learned can really affect people in great ways, and that's terrifying for me. What if it doesn't? What if it affects them poorly? What if they blame me later? Those are all those 9 things that want to keep me back from using my voice.
Yeah, but instead you're trying to embrace the both and of it. Like, I'm both going to be amazing because I'm gifted in this. And I mean, you have so many followers and people who look up to you across the world. And I know you're going to do awesome at it. I've seen your other trainings. You're amazing at that. But, and here you've been amazing. But like, I also hear just, you know, if there's any sort of conflict, and I might be like, oh, I can't do it. And we're just both reminding you, you can, there's going to be the haters, but you can, and you can fail forward sometimes because nothing is perfect. So what can a 9 say to their inner voice if there's this little, like, say an outer judge does forget them, or an outer judge does get jealous, or say you suck? Like, what can a 9 do to soothe?
Wow. I think one thing that I think is helpful for 9s is you being awesome does not mean other people aren't. It's not a slice of pie that if you take a piece, other people have less. That's not how it works. But I think 9s can get stuck in that, because 9s, like, if I think I'm great and awesome, like, that means that takes away from other people, but it's not actually.
So kind.
9s. Yeah. And I think if a 9 thinks they're being arrogant or angry or unfair, the odds of that being true are actually probably really low. I talked to I have a friend of mine who told me, his name is Julius, he's Enneagram 1. He's a fantastic human being. He said the other day, I was like, hey, I want to put this thing on Instagram, but it feels really arrogant and self-centered. And he was like, hey, I just want to tell you right now that I say this 9s, if you think what you're doing is arrogant and self-centered, I can almost guarantee you that it's normal for other people. Yeah, because 9s have such a filter of I'm not important. And so when several years ago, when I was almost finally fully licensed as a therapist, I had a friend say, like, oh, that's congratulations. Like, you've done so much. Like, how are you going to celebrate? And I said, I'm probably not going to celebrate. It's probably not that big of a deal. And he was like, you have spent so much money and over 2,000 hours post-graduation and 2 years of grad school. It's like, you deserve this. You've earned it. And I had this, and I had this moment of like, you know what? I do. And then I said that out loud and instantly flushed with shame of like, that was so arrogant.
Yes.
And then, but I was able to like note that and like, wait a second, like, Oh, that was, and I was able to hold both at once. Like, I'm uncomfortable with this because it's new, and I really believe that it was a really cool experience.
I'm so glad you held the both and because
Yes, me
that is
too. Me too.
so, like you said, most types don't think that way. But my nine had buyer's remorse the other day when she bought herself a pair of Converse after saving $1,000. I'm like, you're allowed to buy yourself. She goes,
I
I always have buyer's remorse. And so I'm understanding it now with what you said.
Man, I've been driving this car for years. That was a few $1,000s, and it's a piece of garbage, and it's in a shop right now, and I might have to spend even more money. And I'm thinking about maybe just getting a new car finally. And I
Yeah.
was just talking to my mom about it because she's great financial stuff. And I told her in the conversation I had with her just 2 days ago, I said several times, please tell me that this isn't a financially irresponsible decision. She's like, no, it's not. This is actually probably more responsible than pouring money into an old one. Like, do it.
Yes.
But I asked at least 3 or 4 times during that conversation because it felt irresponsible.
Felt bad. And that just really
Bad.
allows people to see you. Thank you for being vulnerable. I think we were
Mhm.
vulnerable today to let people know, like, we're in the work with you. But thank you for letting nines hear that. Cause like I said, there's so many
Yeah, yeah.
nines helpful
This
for
was
all the
great.
types. Thank you. Just
Good.
such a gift to us. You guys make sure you check out everything with Michael because whether you're in person or taking his online courses or following him on Instagram, you can see what a wealth of information you are. Thank you
Mhm.
so much, Michael. Where can they catch up with you in general
Yes, you're
too?
so welcome. Instagram,
Okay,
Michael
check
Shahan Therapy, Michael Shahan underscore therapy. But I'm actually working on like a regular email thing, like a weekly email update that I want to do. That I'm just kind of applying what I learn, giving new little like I don't know, yeah, just um wanting to let people into my life a little bit more. Here's what I'm learning. Here's some wisdom that I've gained. Here's a little Enneagram tidbit, and I kind of want to do that weekly. So like that's something I'm gonna do here very soon, hopefully. And so, but my website, michaelshahan.com, my Instagram, Michael Shahan underscore therapy. That's kind of where I'm active, and all my stuff is always updated the most.
Okay, thank you. We want to hear your voice.